The letter arrived on a Tuesday, the day Abigail Palmer's life changed forever. She stood on the dusty platform of Genoa, Nevada, clutching the tear-stained paper in her trembling hands. The stagecoach that had delivered her to this desolate frontier town had already disappeared in a cloud of dust, taking with it her last connection to civilization. "Miss, are you all right?" Abigail looked up to see a weathered man with kind eyes observing her with concern. She blinked away tears and straightened her spine the way her mother had taught her. A lady never shows weakness in public. "I'm quite all right, thank you," she replied, though nothing could have been further from the truth. The letter in her hand had informed her that Theodore Montgomery, the man she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry, was dead. Buried 3 weeks before she'd even set foot in Nevada territory. The year was 1872, and at 22, Abigail Palmer was alone in a strange town with nothing but $3 to her name and a trunk full of wedding clothes she would never wear. "You're the mail-order bride," the man stated rather than asked. "Montgomery's gal." Abigail nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "I'm Sheriff Wilson." He removed his hat respectfully. "I'm mighty sorry about Theodore. Fever took him fast. Nobody expected it." "The letter said as much," Abigail managed. "I don't suppose there's a return coach leaving soon." Sheriff Wilson's expression grew sympathetic. "Not for another fortnight, Miss Palmer, and even then." He trailed off, but Abigail understood the unspoken truth. She couldn't afford passage back east, and there was nothing waiting for her there anyway. Her parents were dead, the family home sold to pay her father's debts, and her position as a governess had been filled the moment she'd left to become a bride. "Is there a boarding house?" she asked, summoning what little dignity remained. "There is, but the sheriff seemed uncomfortable." "Thing is, Miss Palmer, Theo paid your passage with the understanding you'd be his wife. The town council, well, they're particular about unmarried ladies staying too long without proper arrangements." "I see." Abigail felt the world closing in around her. In a single day, she had lost her future husband, her home, and apparently her right to exist independently in this town. There might be a solution. Sheriff Wilson nodded toward the far end of the street. "That's Owen Grant's place, the Double G. He and Theodore were partners. Best friends since they fought together in the war." Abigail followed his gaze to a tall man securing a horse outside the general store. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about his presence, the straight back, broad shoulders, and purposeful movements. "Mr. Grant was with Theodore when he passed," the sheriff continued. "Might be worth speaking with him about your situation." As if sensing their attention, the man turned and saw them. He said something to the store proprietor and began walking toward them with long, confident strides. "Wilson," he greeted the sheriff with a nod before his eyes settled on Abigail. Those eyes, startlingly blue against sun-bronzed skin, widened slightly in recognition. "You must be Miss Palmer." "Yes," she confirmed, extending a gloved hand automatically. "Abigail Palmer." His large, calloused hand enveloped hers gently. "Owen Grant, I was Theo's partner." His voice dropped. "I'm sorry you've come all this way for such sad news." "You knew," anger flashed through her grief. "You knew I was coming, yet no one thought to send word before I traveled across the country." Owen Grant's expression darkened. "I sent 3 telegrams to the address Theo had, never got a response." "I was already traveling," Abigail realized. The messages would have arrived at her former employer's home after she'd departed. For 3 weeks, she had been riding toward a dead man while this stranger had tried to spare her the journey. "Miss Palmer has nowhere to go," Sheriff Wilson interjected. "The boarding house isn't—" "I know," Owen Grant interrupted, his gaze never leaving Abigail's face. Something passed across his features, determination, perhaps, or resignation. "Miss Palmer, I don't know what Theo told you about our arrangement, but we were partners in everything. The ranch, the cattle, the future we were building." He mentioned a partnership, she acknowledged. Though not in great detail, Owen nodded. "Theo wasn't one for details. The truth is, the Double G is as much his legacy as mine." He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I'll honor the promise he made to you." Abigail stared at him in confusion. "What exactly are you saying, Mr. Grant?" I'm saying that if you want it, there's still a place for you at the ranch. The house Theo was building for you is nearly finished, and if you're amenable—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm prepared to offer you the protection of my name," the sheriff coughed awkwardly. "I'll leave you two to discuss matters," he said, backing away. Abigail barely noticed his departure, too stunned by the cowboy's proposition. "Are you proposing marriage, Mr. Grant, to a woman you've just met? I'm offering you a choice, Miss Palmer, a home and security at the very least. Theo wanted to make a life with you. He chose you for a reason." His eyes met her steadily. "I'll honor his choice." "And what of love, Mr. Grant?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Something softened in his expression. "Theo loved you through your letters. He read them to me, sometimes the parts he wasn't too private to share. He said you had a good heart and a strong mind." A small smile touched his lips. "Those are fine foundations to build upon." Abigail looked down at her worn traveling gloves, her mind racing. The practical part of her recognized the sensibility of his offer. The romantic in her, the girl who had dreamed of a love match, felt betrayed by the compromise. "I don't expect an answer now," Owen said quietly. "Come to the ranch, rest, see the place that would have been your home, then decide." When she finally looked up, something in his steady gaze made her decision easier. This wasn't a passionate declaration of love, but neither was it merely charity or obligation. It was an honorable man keeping a promise to his friend and offering a chance at the life she had traveled so far to find. "I accept your invitation to visit the ranch, Mr. Grant," she said carefully. "Beyond that, I make no promises." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with this compromise. "That's fair." He glanced at her trunk. "Is this all your belongings?" "Yes, I traveled light." Without another word, he lifted her trunk effortlessly and carried it to a wagon waiting near the general store. Abigail followed, acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk who had undoubtedly been speculating about the mail-order bride's arrival. The proprietor of the general store, a round man with spectacles, eyed her with undisguised interest as Owen loaded her trunk. "This is Miss Palmer," Owen said simply. "Theodore's intended," the shopkeeper nodded. "Heard about your arrival, terrible business, just terrible." He offered his hand. "Jacob Miller. My wife and I run the general store. Anything you need, you come see us." "Thank you, Mr. Miller," Abigail replied, shaking his hand. "We'll need supplies," Owen told Miller. "The usual monthly order plus whatever extra you think a lady might require." While the men discussed provisions, Abigail observed the town of Genoa. It was smaller than she'd imagined, a single main street with wooden buildings on either side, a church steeple visible in the distance, and mountains rising majestically beyond. Everything seemed coated in a fine layer of dust, as if the desert was slowly reclaiming the town despite human efforts to tame it. Her attention was drawn back to Owen Grant as he finished his business. There was an efficiency to his movements, a quiet authority that seemed to command respect without demanding it. Theodore's letters had mentioned his partner only in passing. "Grant thinks the southern pasture will yield better this year," or "Grant has ideas about irrigation that might work," never hinting at the man himself. "Ready?" he asked, returning to her side. Abigail nodded, allowing him to help her onto the wagon seat. As they left town, she felt the weight of stares on her back, some curious, some pitying, all wondering what would become of Theodore Montgomery's mail-order bride. The road to the Double G Ranch wound through sagebrush-dotted hills that gradually gave way to greener land as they followed a creek. Owen handled the team with skill, maintaining a respectful silence that Abigail appreciated. Her mind was too full for idle conversation. After about an hour, they crested a hill and the valley opened before them. Nestled against the base of the mountains was a sprawling ranch, larger and more impressive than anything she had imagined from Theodore's letters. "The Double G," Owen said simply. 2,000 acres. "Good water, good grass." "It's beautiful," Abigail admitted, taking in the main house, barns, corrals, and outbuildings that formed the heart of the operation. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing peacefully. "That's your house," Owen pointed to a smaller structure set apart from the main house, but still within the ranch compound. Theo started it last spring after your first letter. Abigail's throat tightened at the sight of the neat little house with its covered porch and newly painted shutters. A home built for a bride who arrived too late. As they approached the ranch, several workers stopped to watch their arrival. A woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's Mrs. Alvarez," Owen explained. "She keeps house for us and her husband Diego is our foreman." The wagon pulled to a stop in the yard, and Owen helped Abigail down before any of the ranch hands could approach. She was conscious of curious glances, quickly averted when Owen's gaze moved in their direction. Mrs. Alvarez approached, her dark eyes taking in Abigail with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. "Miss Palmer, welcome to Double G. I have prepared the guest room in the main house for you." Abigail looked questioningly at Owen, who explained, "I thought you might be more comfortable there until you decide about your future." "Thank you," Abigail said, grateful for his consideration. "That's very thoughtful. Diego will show the men where to take your trunk, Mrs. Alvarez continued, "You must be tired from your journey." Indeed, exhaustion was beginning to overwhelm Abigail, physical fatigue compounded by emotional turmoil. She allowed Mrs. Alvarez to guide her toward the main house, pausing only to look back at Owen. "We'll talk tomorrow," he promised. "After you've rested." The main house was surprisingly comfortable, a solid two-story structure built of timber and stone, with large windows and practical furnishings softened by unexpected touches of refinement. Mrs. Alvarez led her to a pleasant guest room on the second floor, where a copper tub was already being filled with steaming water. "Mr. Grant thought you might appreciate a bath after your journey," the housekeeper explained. "I'll bring you something to eat once you're settled." Left alone, Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears she had been holding back all day. She wept for Theodore, a man she had known only through letters yet had planned to spend her life with. She wept for herself and the uncertain future that stretched before her. And when the tears finally subsided, she rose and began to undress, methodically removing the layers of her traveling costume. The bath was a luxury she hadn't expected. And as she lowered herself into the warm water, Abigail felt some of the tension leaving her body. She thought of Owen Grant's unexpected offer. Was it merely obligation that motivated him, or something more? And could she accept such an arrangement, knowing that at best it would be a marriage of convenience rather than love by the time Mrs. Alvarez returned with a tray of food, hearty beef stew, fresh bread, and apple preserves. Abigail had dressed in a simple skirt and shirtwaist and braided her damp hair. "Thank you, Mrs. Alvarez. This looks wonderful. You eat, Miss Palmer. You need strength." The housekeeper hesitated. "Mr. Theodore spoke often of you. He was very happy about your coming." Abigail smiled sadly. "Thank you for telling me that." After Mrs. Alvarez left, Abigail ate mechanically, hardly tasting the food despite its quality. As darkness fell, she moved to the window, looking out at the ranch illuminated by a nearly full moon. In the distance, she could see the outline of what would have been her home with Theodore. Closer, a light burned in what she assumed was Owen Grant's study in the main house below. She wondered what kind of man he truly was, this partner who had offered to honor his friend's promise. Tomorrow she would begin to find out. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the curtains and the distant sounds of her ranch coming to life. Abigail dressed carefully in her second-best day dress, a practical navy blue with minimal trim, and arranged her hair in a simple knot. After nearly a week of travel in the same garments, it felt good to be properly dressed again. She found her way downstairs to a large kitchen where Mrs. Alvarez was already preparing breakfast. The aroma of coffee, bacon, and biscuits filled the air. "Good morning, Miss Palmer. Did you sleep well?" "Surprisingly, yes," Abigail admitted. After weeks of stagecoach seats and questionable hotel beds, the clean, comfortable guest room had been a haven. "Mr. Grant is already out checking the north pasture. He said to tell you he would return mid-morning to show you around if you're feeling up to it." Mrs. Alvarez placed a plate of food before her. "Eat, you are too thin." Abigail smiled despite herself. "You sound like my grandmother." "Grandmothers know things." Mrs. Alvarez said with an answering smile that softened her stern features. Over breakfast, Abigail learned more about the ranch and its operation. The Double G employed 15 men year-round with additional hands during roundup and branding. The Alvarezes had been with Owen Grant from the beginning when he and Theodore had purchased the struggling property 6 years earlier after returning from the war. Mr. Theodore was good with numbers, Mrs. Alvarez explained. Mr. Grant knows cattle and land. Together they built all this. She gestured broadly, encompassing the ranch and all it contained. Now Mr. Grant works twice as hard, doing both parts. How did Theodore die? Abigail asked the question that had been haunting her. Mrs. Alvarez's expression grew solemn. Fever. It came sudden after he cut himself mending fence. The wound turned bad. By the time the doctor came from town, the poison was in his blood. She crossed herself. 3 days and he was gone. Mr. Grant never left his side. Abigail nodded, a lump forming in her throat. At least Theodore hadn't died alone. After breakfast, she asked to see the small house that would have been hers. Mrs. Alvarez led her across the yard, past curious ranch hands who tipped their hats respectfully, to the neat structure she had glimpsed the previous evening. Mr. Theodore finished the outside before. Mrs. Alvarez didn't need to complete the sentence. Inside needs more work. The house was simple but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a small parlor, and a kitchen. The larger rooms were nearly finished, lacking only furnishings and the personal touches that would make it a home. The kitchen still needed cabinets and a proper stove, though the spaces for them were clearly marked. He worked on it whenever he could, Mrs. Alvarez said softly. Even after long days with the cattle. Abigail ran her hand along a windowsill, imagining Theodore planing the wood smooth, thinking of the bride who would appreciate his efforts. A bride who arrived too late. "Thank you for showing me," she said finally, unable to remain in the house that represented so many unfulfilled hopes. Back at the main house, Abigail settled on the front porch with a book from Owen's modest library, though she found herself reading the same page repeatedly as her mind wandered. Around mid-morning, she spotted a rider approaching Owen, returning as promised. He dismounted gracefully, handing the reins to a young ranch hand before joining her on the porch. The morning sun highlighted auburn tints in his dark hair, and his eyes seemed even bluer in daylight. "Miss Palmer," he greeted her, removing his hat. "I hope you rested well." "I did, thank you." She closed her book. "Mrs. Alvarez showed me the house this morning." A shadow crossed his face. Theo was proud of that house. He wanted everything to be perfect for your arrival. "It would have been lovely," Abigail said softly. Owen seemed to gather himself. "I thought you might like to see the rest of the ranch today if you're feeling up to it." "I would appreciate that. I'll have 2 horses saddled." He started to turn away, then paused. "Unless you prefer to ride in the buggy, I can ride," Abigail assured him. "My father taught me when I was young." Soon they were mounted, Abigail on a gentle mare named Daisy, Owen on his own chestnut gelding, and heading away from the ranch buildings. He showed her the boundaries of the property, explaining how they had expanded from the original purchase, adding water rights and improving the grazing land. Theodore managed the business side, Owen explained as they rode. "Contracts, accounts, planning, I handled the cattle, the land, the men." There was no boasting in his tone, merely a statement of facts. "And now you do both," Abigail observed. He nodded, a flicker of weariness crossing his features before disappearing. "It's been challenging. Theo had a head for figures that I lack." "I was a governess before coming west," Abigail found herself offering. "I'm quite proficient with accounts and correspondence." Owen looked at her with new interest. "Theo mentioned you were educated, but not the details." They stopped at a ridge overlooking a verdant valley where cattle grazed peacefully. Owen dismounted and helped Abigail down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. She was conscious of his proximity, the clean scent of soap beneath the inevitable dust of the range, the breadth of his shoulders, the careful way he stepped back once she was safely on the ground. "This is my favorite view of the ranch," he said, gesturing toward the panorama before them. "You can see almost the entire operation from here." Abigail took in the rolling land, the creek winding through it, the distant mountains framing the picture. "It's beautiful," she acknowledged. Theodore wrote that it reminded him of Virginia where he grew up. "Did he tell you that's how we met? We both served in the Virginia cavalry, though he was an officer and I was." Owen paused. "Well, I wasn't." "He mentioned you served together but didn't elaborate." Owen nodded, his gaze distant. "Theo saved my life at Cold Harbor. Dragged me off the field when I was hit. After the war, when there was nothing left of my family's farm, he suggested we head west together. Said he had money from his father's estate but needed someone who knew cattle." A faint smile touched his lips. "I'd never even owned a cow, but he believed I could learn." "And you did," Abigail observed, looking at the thriving ranch spread below them. "We both learned what we needed to." Owen turned to face her directly. "Miss Palmer, I want to be clear about my offer. I meant what I said yesterday. I'll honor Theo's promise to you, whether that means a home of your own here on the ranch, passage back east if that's your preference, or marriage." Abigail completed the sentence when he hesitated. "Yes, marriage." His eyes held her steadily. "I know it's not what you expected when you agreed to come west. You were coming to marry a man you'd corresponded with, a man you had begun to know through letters. I'm a stranger to you." "As Theodore would have been at first," Abigail pointed out. "We had never met in person." "True, but you had chosen each other deliberately. This would be different." Abigail considered his words. "Why would you make such an offer, Mr. Grant? Surely there are women in town who would be eager to marry the owner of the Double G." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps, though I haven't noticed any stampede of potential brides at my door." He grew serious again. "The truth is, Miss Palmer, running this ranch alone is proving more difficult than I anticipated. I need help, someone with a head for business, someone who can manage the household while I manage the land." He paused. "And Theo chose you for a reason. He believed you would be the right partner for building a life here." "A practical arrangement, then," Abigail said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. After all, wasn't that what her agreement with Theodore had been initially? A practical solution to their mutual needs. Practical, yes, Owen acknowledged. "But I hope it could become more given time." He looked away, a hint of color rising in his tanned face. "I'm not good with flowery words, Miss Palmer. I can't promise poetry and romance, but I can promise respect, honesty, and fidelity. I would be a good husband to you." There was a directness to his manner that Abigail found refreshing after the sometimes florid prose of Theodore's letters. Owen Grant was clearly a man who said what he meant, without embellishment. "I appreciate your candor, Mr. Grant," she said finally, "and your generosity. But I need time to consider." "Of course." He nodded, seeming relieved that she hadn't rejected his proposal outright. "Take all the time you need, there's no rush to decide." But there was, Abigail knew, every day she remained at the ranch unmarried would fuel gossip in town. And her options were limited. She had no money to establish herself independently, and no relatives to return to in the east. They remounted and continued their tour of the ranch, the conversation turning to safer topics: the operations of the Double G, the seasonal cycle of ranch work, the community of Genoa. Owen proved to be knowledgeable and articulate when discussing subjects he cared about, his initial reserve gradually giving way to a quiet enthusiasm. By the time they returned to the ranch house for the midday meal, Abigail had learned more about cattle ranching than she had ever expected to know, and something more important, that Owen Grant was a man of substance beneath his reticent exterior. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Abigail would rise early, breakfast with Mrs. Alvarez, then occupy herself with reading or needlework until Owen returned from his morning duties. They would spend time together discussing the ranch, and she began to look over the account books that had been Theodore's domain. Evenings were spent in companionable silence in the main house's small library, Owen handling correspondence while Abigail read or worked on organizing the chaotic bookkeeping system her almost husband had established. On the fourth day, a visitor arrived, Reverend James Harrison from the church in Genoa, his buggy raising dust as it approached the ranch house. Abigail, who had been sitting on the porch, rose to greet him. "Miss Palmer," he said, removing his hat. "I've come to express my condolences on the loss of your intended husband." "Thank you, Reverend Harrison." Abigail had met him briefly in town upon her arrival. "Would you like to come in for some refreshment? I believe Mrs. Alvarez has lemonade." "That would be most welcome." He followed her inside, where Mrs. Alvarez quickly produced lemonade and sugar cookies. "Mr. Grant is checking the eastern fence line," Abigail explained as they settled in the parlor. "He should return shortly." "Actually, Miss Palmer, it's you I came to see." The Reverend set down his glass. "I understand your difficult situation, and I wanted to offer the church's assistance. There's a respectable widow in town who has a room to let, and the Ladies' Aid Society might be able to find you a position teaching at the school." Abigail was taken aback by the offer, not because it wasn't kind, but because it was presented as if her departure from the ranch was a foregone conclusion. "That's very thoughtful, Reverend, but Mr. Grant has already invited me to stay at the ranch while I consider my options." The minister's expression grew concerned. "Miss Palmer, while Mr. Grant's intentions may be honorable, you must understand how this appears. An unmarried young woman living at a bachelor's ranch. The town is already talking." Heat rose in Abigail's cheeks. "I'm staying in the main house with Mrs. Alvarez as chaperone. There has been nothing improper." Of course," he backpedaled. "I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just that appearances matter, especially for a young woman in your position." Before Abigail could respond, they heard the front door open and close, followed by Owen's footsteps in the hallway. "Reverend Harrison," Owen greeted the minister as he entered the parlor, "this is an unexpected pleasure." The clergyman stood. "Mr. Grant." "I was just explaining to Miss Palmer that the town could offer her suitable accommodations while she decides her future." Owen's expression remained neutral, but Abigail noticed his jaw tighten slightly. "Miss Palmer is welcome here for as long as she wishes to stay." "Of course, but considering the circumstances," Owen interrupted, his voice level but firm, "are that Miss Palmer traveled across the country to marry my partner who unexpectedly passed away. The Double G owes her a debt of honor, which I intend to repay." The Reverend looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. "Perhaps I've overstepped. I meant only to offer assistance." "And it's appreciated," Abigail said diplomatically, "but unnecessary at present." After the Reverend's departure, Owen and Abigail remained in the parlor, an awkward silence stretching between them. "The town is talking," Abigail finally said. "About me staying here." Owen sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Small towns always talk." "But you shouldn't feel pressured because of gossip." "It's not just gossip, though, is it? It's my reputation, my future." Abigail rose and moved to the window, watching the dust from the Reverend's departing buggy. "If I stay here much longer without definite arrangements, I'll be compromised in the eyes of the community." "You're worried about your options narrowing," Owen said, understanding in his voice. "That if you stay here unmarried too long, no one else would consider you as a wife." Abigail turned to face him. "Aren't you concerned about your reputation as well?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Cattle ranchers aren't held to the same standards as young ladies, Miss Palmer. That hardly seems fair." "It isn't," he agreed simply. Abigail took a deep breath. "Mr. Grant, Owen, I've been considering your offer." He straightened, his expression carefully neutral. "And I believe it could be a sensible arrangement. You need help with the business side of the ranch, and I need—" She hesitated. "I need security, a home. Is that a yes?" His voice was steady, but she detected a hint of something else beneath it. "Hope, perhaps. It's a yes with conditions," Abigail clarified. "I would expect a true partnership, not merely a nominal role as your wife. I want to contribute meaningfully to the ranch's operations." "Of course," Owen nodded. "That was always my intention." "And I would want us to begin as friends," she continued, "with the understanding that more might develop over time, but without pressure or expectations." Something flashed in his eyes, disappointment perhaps, quickly masked. "I understand, a marriage in name initially." Abigail felt a blush rising. "I didn't say that exactly. I meant that we should get to know each other properly before. Before sharing a marriage bed, he finished bluntly, though his tone remained respectful. I would never force anything unwelcome on you, Miss Palmer. Abigail, she corrected him softly, if we're to be married, you should use my given name. Abigail, he repeated, and something about the way he said it with reverence almost made her heart beat faster. And I'm Owen to you always. Then yes, Owen Grant, I accept your proposal of marriage with the conditions stated. He crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. His were calloused from work, strong and warm around her smaller ones. I'll do everything in my power to make you happy, Abigail, that's my promise to you. The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable, and Abigail felt a flutter of something that might, with time, grow into more than mere friendship or practical partnership. When shall we marry? She asked, practical considerations reasserting themselves. As soon as you wish. Reverend Harrison could perform the ceremony this Sunday after services, or we could wait longer if you prefer. Sunday would be appropriate, Abigail decided. There's no reason to delay, and it would put an end to the town's speculation. Owen nodded, still holding her hands. I should get you a ring. That's not necessary, it is, he insisted. Not because of the town or appearances, but because you deserve the proper courtesies. I'll ride into Virginia City tomorrow. There's a jeweler there who might have something suitable. Abigail was touched by his consideration. Thank you. That evening, they informed Mrs. Alvarez of their plans. The housekeeper's expression was unreadable at first, but as Abigail helped her prepare supper, the older woman softened. Mr. Grant is a good man, she said, kneading bread dough with practiced hands. Not many would do what he offers. I know, Abigail acknowledged. Mrs. Alvarez gave her a shrewd look. But you worry about love, yes, young women always do. Abigail smiled ruefully. Is it that obvious? Marriage is not like in stories, the housekeeper said firmly. Real love grows slowly like good bread. First you mix, then you knead, then you wait. Patience. She punched the dough for emphasis. My Diego and I arranged marriage. I cried for weeks before the wedding. Now 30 years and I would die without him, she nodded decisively. You will see. The next day, Owen rode to Virginia City as promised, leaving Abigail to continue organizing Theodore's chaotic business records. She was surprised to discover that while the ranch appeared prosperous, its finances were more precarious than she'd realized. Theodore had been borrowing against future profits to expand, a risky strategy that required careful management to succeed. When Owen returned that evening, he found her still at the desk, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. You've been busy, he observed, removing his hat and coat. There's much to do, Abigail replied, looking up from her work. Theodore's system of bookkeeping was creative. A shadow crossed Owen's face at the mention of his friend, but he nodded. He always said he had it all organized in his head. That's the problem with such systems, Abigail said gently. They die with their creator. Owen approached the desk, reaching into his pocket. I have something for you. He produced a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a modest diamond flanked by 2 small sapphires. It's beautiful, Abigail breathed, genuinely surprised by the elegant choice. The sapphires reminded me of your eyes, Owen said, then looked immediately embarrassed by the admission. I mean, they're a similar shade of blue. Abigail felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. Thank you, it's perfect. He carefully removed the ring from its box and, taking her left hand, slid it onto her finger. It fit surprisingly well. I guessed the size, he explained, from when I held your hand. The moment felt unexpectedly intimate, his fingers warm against hers, his eyes fixed on their joined hands, the weight of the ring both foreign and somehow right on her finger. It fits perfectly, she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, something passed between them, a connection that went beyond their practical arrangement. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. I should wash up for supper. Mrs. Alvarez will be serving soon. As he left, Abigail looked down at the ring on her finger, turning it slightly to catch the light. It was a far more thoughtful choice than she had expected, not ostentatious, but elegant and personal. Perhaps there was more to Owen Grant than the stoic rancher he presented to the world. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, a perfect spring day for a wedding, though not the wedding Abigail had imagined when she'd left Pennsylvania. She dressed carefully in her best gown, a dove-gray silk with subtle lace trim that she had purchased for her arrival in Genoa. It wasn't a wedding dress, but it was the finest thing she owned. Mrs. Alvarez helped with her hair, arranging it in a more elaborate style than Abigail usually wore and adding a sprig of wildflowers. "You look beautiful," the housekeeper declared, stepping back to admire her work. "Mr. Grant will be pleased. Has he said anything?" Abigail asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "About the wedding, I mean," Mrs. Alvarez smiled knowingly. "He is nervous like any groom. Diego says he checked the buggy wheels 3 times this morning." The thought of the composed, confident rancher being nervous about their wedding warmed something in Abigail's heart. They traveled to town in the ranch's best buggy, Owen wearing a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, looking every inch the prosperous rancher. "You're very handsome today," Abigail said impulsively as they neared town. Owen glanced at her, surprise and pleasure flashing across his features. "And you're beautiful," he replied simply, his eyes conveying his sincerity. The small church was already filled when they arrived, the townsfolk turning to watch as they walked up the aisle together. Abigail recognized faces from her brief time in Genoa, the general store proprietor and his wife, the sheriff, various shopkeepers and ranchers. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to approval to barely concealed disapproval. Reverend Harrison conducted the ceremony with dignified efficiency. When it came time for the vows, Owen's voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving hers as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. Abigail repeated the same words, finding them easier to say than she had expected. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared. "You may kiss your bride." Owen hesitated for just a moment before leaning forward to place a gentle, almost chaste kiss on her lips. Even that brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through Abigail. His eyes, when he drew back, held a question she wasn't ready to answer. After the ceremony, the townspeople offered congratulations, some more sincere than others. Mrs. Miller, the storekeeper's wife, clasped Abigail's hands warmly. "We're so pleased to welcome you properly to Genoa, Mrs. Grant," she said. "Though the circumstances were unexpected, it seems God had a plan after all. Others were less generous." Abigail overheard 2 women whispering behind their hands. "Barely waited until poor Theodore was cold in his grave, and always thought Grant had his eye on that mail-order bride." Owen must have heard too, for his jaw tightened, but he said nothing, merely placing a protective hand at the small of Abigail's back as they moved through the crowd. The reception at the town hall was modest but pleasant, with food contributed by the Ladies' Aid Society and music provided by local fiddlers. Owen was attentive throughout, never straying far from Abigail's side yet giving her space to converse with the women who approached her. As the afternoon waned, he leaned close to ask quietly, "Are you ready to go home, home?" The word resonated with Abigail. The double G was her home now, not just a temporary refuge. She was Mrs. Owen Grant, mistress of the ranch. "Yes," she replied, "I think I am." The drive back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts as the landscape rolled by. When they arrived, Mrs. Alvarez had prepared a special supper for them, and the ranch hands had decorated the porch with strings of paper lanterns. "A surprise," Owen explained. They wanted to celebrate properly. Abigail was touched by the gesture. After supper, several of the men produced instruments, a guitar, a fiddle, a harmonica, and began to play. Owen turned to her with an unexpected smile. "Would you honor me with a dance, Mrs. Grant?" She placed her hand in his outstretched one, allowing him to lead her to the cleared area before the porch. He proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer, leading her confidently through a waltz as the ranch hands played a passable rendition of a tune she half remembered from her days in Philadelphia society. "You dance very well," she observed as they moved together under the stars. Theodore insisted we learn before heading west, Owen explained, his hand warm and steady at her waist. Said a gentleman should know how to dance, even on the frontier. The mention of Theodore no longer brought the sharp pain it had days earlier. Instead, Abigail felt a gentle sadness and something like gratitude for the man whose letters had brought her west and whose friendship with Owen had, in a roundabout way, led to this unexpected marriage. As the evening progressed, Abigail became increasingly aware of what would traditionally follow the celebrations the wedding night. Despite their agreement to begin as friends, there was an undeniable tension building between them, especially when their eyes met across the room or their hands touched in passing. When the festivities finally wound down and the ranch hands retired to the bunkhouse, Owen walked with Abigail toward the main house. At the foot of the stairs, he stopped. "I've had my things moved to the small house," he said quietly. "You'll have the main house to yourself with Mrs. Alvarez until we decide otherwise." Abigail was surprised and touched by his consideration. "You didn't have to do that." "I meant what I said about respecting your wishes, Abigail." His voice was gentle but firm. "We'll take this at whatever pace feels right to you." She studied his face in the soft lamplight, the strong lines of his jaw beneath the neatly trimmed beard, the clear blue eyes that held her steadily, the mouth that had briefly touched hers in the church. Something stirred within her, a longing she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded, then leaned forward to place a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Good night, Mrs. Grant. I'll see you in the morning." As Abigail watched him walk away toward what should have been her home with Theodore now temporarily Owen's bachelor quarters, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief at his consideration, certainly. Respect for his willingness to honor their agreement so thoroughly. But also, unexpectedly, a hint of disappointment. That night, in what was now officially her bedroom in the main house, Abigail lay awake for a long time, contemplating the swift changes in her life and the unusual marriage she had entered. When sleep finally came, she dreamed of blue eyes and gentle hands. The days following the wedding established a new rhythm at the Double G. Abigail took over the business correspondence and accounting, bringing order to what had been chaos under Theodore's management. Owen continued handling the physical operations of the ranch, but now they consulted each other on decisions, meeting each evening to discuss the day's developments. Their relationship evolved gradually. Meals were taken together in the main house, and they spent evenings in the library, sometimes working, sometimes simply reading in companionable silence. Owen proved to be more educated than Abigail had initially assumed, with a particular interest in history and a surprising knowledge of poetry, though he rarely quoted it. A week after the wedding, Abigail discovered the true extent of the ranch's financial challenges. Theodore had taken out a substantial loan from the Virginia City Bank to finance the purchase of new breeding stock, alone that would come due at the end of the summer. "Did you know about this?" she asked Owen, showing him the promissory note she had found tucked in a ledger. His expression darkened as he reviewed the document. Theo mentioned expanding the herd, but not that he'd borrowed so heavily to do it. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Abigail had come to recognize as a sign of stress. The timing couldn't be worse. "The drought has left the cattle underweight, and prices are down. Could we request an extension from the bank?" Owen shook his head. "Simmons at the Virginia City Bank is known for foreclosing at the first sign of trouble." That's probably why Theo didn't go to him. "This note is from a private investor." He studied the signature. "Elliot Blackwood, I don't know him." "I'll write to him," Abigail decided. "Explain the situation, request more time." "It's worth trying," Owen agreed, though his expression remained troubled. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Owen was unusually quiet. "Are you worried about the loan?" Abigail finally asked. "Yes," he admitted, "but not just that." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Abigail, if I can't make the payment, we could lose the ranch. I don't want you to regret your decision to marry me." I don't regret it, she said honestly. We'll find a way through this challenge together. Something softened in his eyes. Together, he repeated. I'm still getting used to that. To having a partner. To having you as a partner, he clarified. You're not what I expected. Abigail raised an eyebrow. Is that good or bad? A smile touched his lips. Good, definitely good. He hesitated, then added, Theo always said you were exceptional, but I thought he was just smitten. He was right, though. The compliment warmed her. Tell me about him, she requested. Not the Theodore from the letters, but the man you knew. Owen's smile grew reminiscent. Theo was the most optimistic person I've ever met, always saw the best in everything and everyone. He could talk a bear out of honey, that man, he chuckled. He was terrible with practical details but brilliant with grand plans. The double G was his vision before it was ever real. And you made his vision reality, Abigail observed. We did, together. Owen's expression grew serious again. He was like a brother to me, Abigail, closer than blood could have been. Losing him. I know, she said softly, reaching over to place her hand over his. I'm sorry. His fingers intertwined with hers, the contact sending a now familiar warmth through her. He would have made you happy. Perhaps, Abigail acknowledged, but we'll never know that. What I do know is that I'm finding happiness here with you, despite the circumstances that brought us together. Owen's eyes met hers, hope and something deeper reflected in their blue depths. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a kiss unlike their brief contact at the wedding. This was gentle but deliberate, conveying affection and growing desire. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Abigail knew something fundamental had shifted between them. Their marriage of convenience was becoming something more. The following weeks brought both challenges and unexpected joys. The reply from Elliot Blackwood arrived terse and unyielding, insisting on payment in full by the original due date. Abigail wrote again, more forcefully, proposing a partial payment with interest on the remainder. Meanwhile, Owen worked tirelessly to ready the herd for market, hoping to secure the best possible prices despite the lingering effects of drought. Despite these pressures, their personal relationship continued to deepen. Their kisses grew more frequent and passionate, though Owen never pressed for more, respecting their original agreement. Abigail found herself increasingly drawn to her husband, not just to his physical presence, which affected her more strongly with each passing day, but to the man himself. His quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, his occasional flashes of unexpected humor all combined to create a picture of a man very different from the one she had imagined marrying. One evening in late July, Abigail was reviewing the ledgers when she noticed a pattern in Theodore's accounts. Following a hunch, she began cross-referencing various entries, eventually uncovering something that made her heart race with hope. Owen, she called, finding him in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. I think I've found something important. He followed her back to the house, where she showed him her discovery. Theodore was making regular payments to an account in Sacramento, she explained. I thought at first it might be another loan, but look here, she pointed to an entry notation. It's a savings account. I think he was setting aside money, possibly for your future together. Owen studied the ledgers, his expression brightening. You're right, this is Theo's handwriting, but I never knew about this account. He squeezed her hand. Abigail, if there's enough there, it could cover the loan payment, she finished, sharing his excitement. We need to contact the Sacramento bank immediately. The following day, Owen rode to town to send telegrams to the Sacramento bank, inquiring about the account and establishing Abigail as Theodore's widow with a right to access the funds. The response, when it came, exceeded their hopes. Theodore had indeed been saving, accumulating a sum that would cover most of the loan payment. We're still short, Abigail calculated, but it's much more manageable now. We could sell some of the less productive land to make up the difference. No, Owen shook his head. I have some savings of my own, not much, but enough to close the gap. You never mentioned that before. He looked slightly embarrassed. It was meant for, well, for building my own house someday, but the ranch is more important. Abigail studied him thoughtfully. You were going to leave, once Theodore and I were married. Not leave the ranch, he clarified. Just give you two space. The main house would have been yours, and I planned to build something smaller for myself. The thought of Owen planning so considerately for a future that would have seen him essentially sidelined in the operation he had helped build touched Abigail deeply. You're a good man, Owen Grant, she said softly. Better than I realized at first. His eyes met hers, vulnerability evident in them. Good enough for you to consider making our marriage real in all ways. The directness of the question took her breath away, but she appreciated his honesty. In truth, she had been thinking the same thing with increasing frequency. Yes, she answered simply. I think it's time. The joy that lit his face was all the confirmation she needed that her decision was right. That night, for the first time, Abigail didn't sleep alone. Owen's lovemaking was like the man himself, considerate, thorough, and unexpectedly passionate beneath his controlled exterior. In his arms, she found a fulfillment she hadn't known to expect, and as they lay together afterward, she knew their marriage had truly begun. August brought the cattle drive to market, with Owen absent for 2 tense weeks. Abigail managed the ranch in his absence with growing confidence, handling everything from a dispute among ranch hands to a broken irrigation pump with calm competence. When Owen returned, his eyes sought her first, before even dismounting from his trail-weary horse. We got top dollar, he announced as he swung down from the saddle, striding toward her through the dust kicked up by the returning riders. Enough to pay Blackwood and have a cushion left over. Abigail's joy was overwhelming. She embraced him despite his trail dust and travel odor, uncaring of the watching ranch hands. I knew you could do it. We did it, he corrected, holding her close. Your management made it possible to bring the best cattle to market. That night, after Owen had bathed away the grime of the trail and they had celebrated privately in ways that still made Abigail blush to contemplate, they sat together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders as they looked out at the ranch that was truly theirs now. I have something to tell you, Abigail said, her heart racing with nervous excitement. Something I discovered while you were away. Owen looked at her questioningly. More financial secrets of Theo's? No, she smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. A different kind of discovery. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. Abigail, are you? Yes, she confirmed. Dr. Simmons confirmed it last week. We're going to have a baby in early spring. Joy, wonder, and a touch of fear crossed Owen's features in rapid succession before settling into a look of such profound happiness that it brought tears to Abigail's eyes. A baby, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Our baby, she echoed, leaning into his embrace. His hand cradled her stomach reverently. I never thought, he broke off, overwhelmed. Never thought what? That I could be this happy, he admitted. After everything Theo's death, the ranch troubles, it seemed like happiness was something that happened to other people. He kissed her gently. Thank you for proving me wrong. September brought Elliot Blackwood himself to the Double G, a thin, sour-faced man with cold eyes who made no secret of his disappointment that they were able to pay the loan in full. I had hoped to acquire this property, he admitted bluntly as Owen counted out the payment. It's well situated for my expansion plans. Then I'm especially glad we could disappoint you, Owen replied pleasantly, though his eyes were hard. After Blackwood departed, Abigail shivered despite the warm day. He reminds me of a vulture waiting for something to die so he can feast on it. Well, the Double G is very much alive, Owen assured her, and thriving thanks to you. As autumn painted the surrounding mountains in gold and crimson, Abigail and Owen continued to build their life together. The small house that Theodore had started for his bride was completed, but not for its original purpose. Instead, it became a home for Diego and Maria Alvarez, a thank you for their years of loyal service and a practical solution as the main house would soon need nursery space. Abigail's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body changing in ways that Owen found endlessly fascinating. His protective instincts grew along with her belly, though he was careful never to smother her independence. Together they planned for the baby's arrival, converting one of the upstairs bedrooms into a nursery filled with furniture Owen made himself in the evenings. "Do you think it will be a boy or a girl?" Abigail asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her now prominent bump where their child occasionally kicked or stretched. "I don't have a preference," Owen replied honestly. "Healthy is all that matters. But if you could choose." He considered. "A daughter with your intelligence and beauty would be a blessing." His eyes twinkled. "Though perhaps not your stubbornness." "I am not stubborn," Abigail protested, making him laugh. "You reorganized the entire storage barn because you didn't agree with my system," he reminded her, "while 5 months pregnant." "That wasn't stubbornness, it was efficiency," she countered primly, before breaking into a smile. "Perhaps a son with your patience would balance things nicely." "And my skill with horses," Owen added, "but your head for figures. The double G will need a good manager someday." The casual mention of their child someday running the ranch struck Abigail forcefully. This was a legacy they were building together, something that would outlast them both. Theodore's vision continued through their efforts, extending into a future they would glimpse but never fully see. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-November. The main house was warm and snug, with Owen having insulated it thoroughly in preparation for the baby's arrival. Christmas was a quiet but joyful affair, with gifts exchanged by the fire and a special dinner prepared by Mrs. Alvarez, who had taken Abigail's pregnancy as a personal mission. As the new year of 1873 began, Abigail's time grew near. Owen insisted on bringing Dr. Simmons from town to stay at the ranch for the final weeks, unwilling to risk being unable to fetch him through winter storms when the moment came. The birth, when it finally happened in late February, was difficult but ultimately joyful. After 18 hours of labor, Abigail delivered a healthy son with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Owen, who had refused to leave her side despite the doctor's initial protests, was the first to hold the child after the midwife cleaned and swaddled him. "Hello, Theodore," he said softly, using the name they had agreed upon months earlier. "Welcome to the Double G." Tears filled Abigail's eyes as she watched her husband gently place their son in her arms. "He has your eyes. And your determination," Owen smiled, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "The doctor says he's never seen a baby so intent on arriving on his own schedule, no matter what anyone else thought." As spring returned to the valley, bringing new calves and green grass, little Theodore Teddy Grant thrived under the doting attention of his parents and the entire ranch household. Mrs. Alvarez declared him the most perfect baby she had ever seen, and even the most hardened ranch hands could be caught making faces at him when they thought no one was looking. One evening in late April, as the lengthening days brought mild temperatures, Owen suggested a ride to the ridge where he had first shown Abigail the full expanse of the Double G. "Are you sure Teddy will be all right?" Abigail asked, glancing toward the house where Mrs. Alvarez was happily cuddling the sleeping infant. "Maria raised 5 children of her own," Owen reminded her, "and she's been complaining that we don't give her enough time with him." The ride was leisurely, both of them enjoying the simple pleasure of being outdoors together without immediate responsibilities. When they reached the ridge, Owen helped Abigail from her horse and led her to the overlook where the entire ranch spread before them, beautiful in the golden light of late afternoon. "It's changed since I first brought you here," Owen observed, his arm around her waist. Abigail nodded. Indeed, the ranch had expanded and improved in the year since their marriage. The herd was larger and healthier, new outbuildings had been constructed, and irrigation improvements had made previously marginal land productive. "It's amazing what we've accomplished," she agreed. "Though I suspect you could have done it without me." Owen shook his head firmly. "No, the Double G would have survived, perhaps, but it wouldn't have thrived. You brought something essential, Abigail, not just your skills with business, but your heart, your vision." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "When I offered to honor Theo's promise, I thought I was doing the right thing for his memory, for you, for the ranch. I never expected. He paused, emotion making his voice rough. I never expected to find the love of my life. Abigail's heart swelled. Though their relationship had deepened into obvious love months ago, Owen was still sparing with declarations. Nor did I, she admitted. I came west to marry a man I knew only through letters, hoping for companionship and security at best. Instead, I found you. Any regrets? He asked, a rare vulnerability showing in his eyes. Only that we didn't have more time together before Teddy arrived, she teased, leaning up to kiss him. Though I wouldn't change a moment of it. As they stood together on the ridge, surveying the land that was their home and legacy, Abigail reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. She had traveled west as a mail-order bride, only to discover her intended groom dead upon arrival. Yet from that tragedy had come unexpected joy, a true partnership, a deep and abiding love, and a family that now included their precious son. Owen's arm tightened around her waist. What are you thinking about so seriously? Just how differently things might have turned out, she replied. If Theodore hadn't died, if you hadn't been there when I arrived, if you hadn't made your offer. I think some things are meant to be, Owen said quietly. Not that Theo's death was meant to happen, I'd give almost anything to have him still with us, but you and me, this partnership we've built. He gestured toward the ranch below. This feels right in a way few things in my life ever have. It does, Abigail agreed, leaning into his embrace. It feels like home. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land they had worked so hard to preserve and improve, Owen and Abigail Grant turned their horses toward home, where their son waited and their future stretched before them, a future built on an unexpected promise honored and the love that had grown in its wake. Years would pass. The Double G would continue to prosper under their joint stewardship. Teddy would be joined by siblings, a sister 2 years later, and eventually another brother. The ranch would weather droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations, and political changes. Through it all, Owen and Abigail would face each challenge together, their partnership only strengthening with time. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, they would sit together on the porch of the main house, hands intertwined, and remember how it all began with a letter, a loss, and a promise kept that had led to so much more than either could have imagined.